Part 5, From One Church to Many. The first 4 parts of this book examine the biblical foundations of the Church, the authority of Scripture and tradition, the sacraments, and the beliefs that have characterized Christianity since its earliest centuries. Yet history raises an unavoidable question. If Christ founded one church, how did Christianity become so divided? The answer is a story of both success and failure. The Church survived persecution and eventually became the dominant institution of Christian civilization. It preserved learning, built universities, inspired great art, and helped shape the Western world. At the same time, power, wealth, politics, and human weakness created opportunities for corruption and abuse. Calls for reform grew louder, culminating in the Protestant Reformation and the gradual fragmentation of Christian unity. This part traces that journey, from a persecuted church united in faith to a world of competing denominations, independent ministries, and conflicting interpretations of Christianity. Let's dive right in. Fact 85. The Church survived 3 centuries of persecution. For nearly 300 years after the death and resurrection of Jesus, Christians lived under the threat of imprisonment, torture, and execution. Roman authorities periodically attempted to suppress the faith, viewing Christians as a challenge to traditional religion and imperial loyalty. Thousands of believers were martyred, yet Christianity continued to spread throughout the empire. The Church survived not because it possessed political power, wealth, or military strength, but because ordinary Christians remained convinced that Christ had risen from the dead. By the beginning of the 4th century, the movement that Rome had repeatedly tried to destroy had become too widespread to eliminate, setting the stage for one of the most dramatic transformations in religious history. 86. Christianity became legal under Constantine. A turning point came in AD 313 when Emperor Constantine issued the Edict of Milan, granting Christians freedom to worship openly. For the first time, believers could build churches, hold public gatherings, and practice their faith without fear of systematic persecution. Christianity moved from the catacombs into the public square. This newfound freedom allowed the Church to expand its influence throughout society, but it also introduced a challenge that earlier Christians had never faced. The Church that had learned to survive without power now had to learn how to wield influence without losing sight of its spiritual mission. 87. Christianity became the official faith of the Roman Empire. When Emperor Theodosius I declared Nicene Christianity the official religion of the Roman Empire in AD 380, the Church's position changed dramatically. What had once been a persecuted minority faith became the dominant religious force within the empire. Christian leaders gained influence, churches multiplied, and Christian beliefs increasingly shaped law, education, and culture. This development enabled the Church to evangelize on an unprecedented scale, but it also brought new temptations. Political power, prestige, and wealth began flowing toward an institution that had originally been built upon sacrifice and martyrdom. The benefits were immense, but so were the risks. 88. The fall of Rome left the Church as Europe's most stable institution. When the Western Roman Empire collapsed in the 5th century, much of Europe entered a period of political instability. Kingdoms rose and fell, invasions disrupted society, and many institutions disappeared. Amid this uncertainty, the Church remained one of the few organizations capable of preserving learning, maintaining records, providing charity, and offering continuity across generations. Monasteries copied manuscripts, bishops governed cities, and churches became centers of community life. As secular authority weakened, the Church increasingly became the institution people relied upon for stability and order. 89. The Church helped build Christian civilization. Throughout the Middle Ages, the Church played a central role in shaping Western civilization. Monasteries preserved ancient knowledge, universities educated future leaders, hospitals cared for the sick, and charitable institutions served the poor. Christian ideas about human dignity, morality, education, and justice influenced laws and social structures across Europe. While medieval society was far from perfect, the Church's contribution to learning, culture, and social welfare was immense. The civilization that emerged from these efforts would later become known as Christendom. 90. Christianity remained one church throughout the medieval world. For centuries after the fall of Rome, Christians throughout Europe, North Africa, and parts of Asia understood themselves to belong to one universal church. Local customs varied, but believers shared the same sacraments, apostolic leadership, and core doctrines. Disputes certainly occurred, yet Christians generally sought resolution through councils and church authority rather than creating separate denominations. The idea of thousands of independent churches teaching conflicting doctrines would have been foreign to most medieval Christians, who viewed the church as a visible and unified institution. 91. Apostolic succession preserved unity across Christendom. The early church believed that authority passed from the apostles to their successors through the laying on of hands. This practice, known as apostolic succession, created a visible chain connecting later bishops to the original apostolic community. Throughout the medieval world, this system helped preserve doctrinal continuity and provided a common framework for resolving disputes. When controversies arose, Christians could appeal to churches whose leadership traced back through generations to the apostles themselves. 92. Popes became arbiters between kings. As Europe developed politically, popes increasingly found themselves mediating disputes among rulers. Kings and nobles often appealed to Rome to settle questions involving succession, legitimacy, treaties, and competing claims to power. Because the pope stood above individual kingdoms, he was frequently viewed as a neutral authority capable of preventing conflicts and maintaining stability. This role greatly increased the prestige of the papacy and made the pope one of the most influential figures in medieval Europe. 93. The divine right of kings increased papal influence. Many medieval rulers believed their authority came ultimately from God, a concept later known as the divine right of kings. Because religious legitimacy was considered essential to political legitimacy, disputes about kingship often involved the church. Papal recognition could strengthen a ruler's claim to authority, while papal opposition could weaken it. As a result, spiritual authority and political power became closely intertwined, elevating both the influence and the responsibilities of the papacy throughout Christendom. 94. The medieval church accumulated great wealth and prestige. As Christianity spread and Christian civilization prospered, the church acquired land, donations, buildings, and institutions on a massive scale. Cathedrals, monasteries, schools, hospitals, and charitable organizations required significant resources to operate. This wealth allowed the church to support education, scholarship, missionary work, and social services, but it also exposed church leaders to temptations that earlier generations of persecuted Christians had rarely faced. Success brought influence, and influence brought opportunities for ambition, corruption, and abuse. 95. Church leaders sometimes confused human authority with divine authority. Just like any person gaining power today who confuse possessing power with possessing knowledge, the church leaders of medieval age often commit intellectual and moral blunders. One famous example was the Galileo controversy, where some church authorities resisted heliocentrism because they believed in the long-held geocentrism popular not only among church but among early scholars. Moreover, they point to certain biblical passages that required a stationary earth. The problem was not scripture itself but the assumption that a particular interpretation could not be challenged. Before we continue, I'd like to ask a simple question. Do you believe that Jesus Christ founded one church? If so, like, subscribe, and leave a comment below saying, "One body, one church." Now let's continue with the next fact. 96. Christian Europe built cathedrals, universities, and monasteries. As Christian civilization expanded, the church invested enormous resources in institutions designed to serve both God and society. Cathedrals became centers of worship and community life, monasteries preserved learning and provided charity, and universities trained scholars, clergy, lawyers, and physicians. Many of Europe's most enduring institutions were born during this period. These achievements reflected the church's growing influence, but they also required tremendous financial commitments that would eventually place increasing strain on church resources. 97. Crusades and other ambitious projects consumed vast resources. Beginning in the 11th century, Christian rulers and church leaders devoted enormous sums of money and manpower to the Crusades and other large-scale endeavors. Whatever one thinks of these campaigns today, they represented a significant financial burden on Christian Europe. At the same time, churches, monasteries, schools, hospitals, and charitable institutions continued to expand. Maintaining Christendom became increasingly expensive, and the pressure to secure funding grew with each passing century. 98. The church became a great patron of art and architecture. The medieval and Renaissance church sponsored some of the greatest artistic achievements in human history. Cathedrals soared above city skylines, painters covered church walls with biblical scenes, and sculptors transformed stone into expressions of faith. Masters such as Michelangelo and Raphael worked under church patronage, creating works that still inspire millions today. Yet beauty came at a cost. As artistic ambitions grew, so did the need for funding, especially for monumental projects such as the rebuilding of St. Peter's Basilica in Rome. 99. Indulgence campaigns became connected to fundraising. An indulgence, properly understood, concerns the remission of certain temporal consequences of forgiven sin. Over time, however, indulgence campaigns became associated with fundraising efforts for church projects. Although official doctrine distinguished spiritual benefits from financial contributions, many ordinary Christians struggled to see the difference. As fundraising campaigns expanded, confusion spread, and critics increasingly accused church leaders of exploiting the faithful for financial gain. 100. Indulgence abuse was real. By the early 16th century, some preachers promoted indulgences in misleading and exaggerated ways. Certain individuals appeared more concerned with collecting money than teaching sound doctrine, creating the impression that spiritual blessings could be purchased. These abuses scandalized many sincere Christians and damaged confidence in church leadership. Even many Catholics acknowledged that reform was necessary, making indulgence abuse one of the sparks that ignited the coming Reformation. 101. Many Catholics already recognized the need for reform. Long before Martin Luther published his 95 Theses, bishops, theologians, monks, and ordinary believers were calling for reform within the Church. Concerns about clerical discipline, financial abuses, education, and moral leadership were widely discussed. The desire for renewal did not originate with Protestantism. It already existed among many faithful Catholics who wanted to correct abuses while preserving Christian unity. The tragedy was not that reform was sought, but that reform eventually became division. 102. Luther began as a protester rather than a founder of a new church. When Martin Luther challenged indulgence practices in 1517, he did not initially intend to create a separate church. His original goal was to provoke debate and encourage reform. However, disagreements soon expanded beyond indulgences into larger questions involving authority, scripture, justification, and the sacraments. As positions hardened on both sides, what began as a protest gradually became a break from Rome and the beginning of a new movement. 103. Luther's break encouraged further breaks from Rome. Once separation from Rome became a possibility, other reformers began developing their own interpretations of Christianity. Luther disagreed with Zwingli, Calvin disagreed with others, and new movements emerged with competing views on doctrine, worship, and church authority. Ironically, many early reformers retained beliefs such as infant baptism, liturgical worship, ordained ministry, confession, and sacramental theology. Yet the principle of separation continued to spread, making future divisions increasingly likely. 104. Henry VIII created a national church after conflict with the papacy. One of the most famous breaks from Rome came not from theology but from royal politics. King Henry VIII sought an annulment of his marriage to Catherine of Aragon after becoming involved with Anne Boleyn and desiring a male heir. When Pope Clement VII refused to grant the annulment under the circumstances presented, Henry responded by rejecting papal authority. Through the act of supremacy, he declared himself supreme head of the Church of England, creating a national church aligned with royal authority and demonstrating how political power could accelerate religious division. 105. Christian unity gave way to increasing fragmentation. The centuries following the Reformation witnessed the multiplication of denominations, churches, and independent ministries. What began as a dispute involving a relatively small number of reformers eventually produced thousands of competing Christian groups. Many later movements defined themselves primarily by how they differed from the Catholic Church and, increasingly, from one another. As authority became decentralized, virtually anyone could claim the right to interpret Christianity independently. The result has been a religious landscape ranging from historic apostolic churches to independent ministries, celebrity pastors, prosperity gospel movements, and self-appointed spiritual leaders whose teachings would have been unfamiliar to both the early church and the original reformers. Conclusion to Part 5. The story of Christianity's second millennium is a story of both remarkable achievement and profound failure. The Church survived persecution, helped build a civilization, preserved knowledge, inspired great art, and spread the gospel throughout the world. Yet it also accumulated power, wealth, and political influence, exposing church leaders to the same temptations that have confronted every human institution throughout history. Calls for reform emerged, abuses occurred, and divisions followed. Today, many people reject Christianity altogether because they point to the Church's mistakes and conclude that it was wrong about too many things. Some cite corruption, indulgence abuses, political entanglements, scientific controversies, or modern scandals as reasons to abandon faith entirely. Whether these conclusions are right or wrong, they are understandable. The failures of Christians have often obscured the message of Christ. Yet an important question remains. Do the sins and mistakes of Christians disprove Christianity, Or do they merely reveal what happens when imperfect human beings fail to live up to the truths they profess? The next part examines how Catholics answer that question and respond to some of the most common objections raised against the faith,